Sex within marriage is not just physical. It is a spiritual covenant that mirrors heaven's intimacy. And if you reduce it to pleasure, performance, or mere duty, you will miss the sacred fire God placed there. Because when the Word says, "The two shall become one flesh," in Genesis 2:24, it's not poetic language, it's a divine formula for fusion, body, soul, and spirit, designed by God to reflect the mystery of Christ and His church. And yet far too many Christian couples secretly live disconnected, emotionally cold, sexually distant, while quoting scriptures in public and wrestling with silence in private, because the world has taught them lies and the church has stayed quiet for far too long. But here's what the enemy doesn't want you to know. Your marriage bed is not neutral territory. It's either a place of unity or a battlefield of disconnection. And every time you retreat into avoidance, every time you let unresolved tensions stay overnight, every time you let shame whisper louder than truth, you hand over territory that was meant to be holy, undefiled, powerful, and yes, pleasurable, because the lie that sex is dirty or unnecessary in marriage didn't come from God. It came from hell, and the longer you believe it, the weaker your covenant becomes, because what you refuse to engage in vulnerability will eventually be attacked through secrecy, silence, and substitution. And suddenly, you or your spouse begin to feel empty, detached, irritable, and neither of you can explain why, until you trace it back to the moment you stopped protecting the most intimate space God gave you. And now you're frustrated, tempted, or numb, praying for breakthrough while the real breach is not in your prayer life, but in your bedroom. And 1 Corinthians 7:5 makes it clear, "Do not deprive each other, lest Satan tempt you." And yet many couples do, not out of rebellion, but ignorance, or fear, or pride. And what began as just a season becomes a stronghold of emotional division. And when sex is no longer a sanctuary, it becomes a silence. And that silence becomes a crack in the foundation, and you start living like roommates, not soulmates, showing up at church together while drifting further apart at home. And the tragedy is that most people don't even realize how spiritually violent it is to let the marriage bed grow cold, how demonic the strategy is to make you too tired, too angry, too insecure, too ashamed to pursue one another in love. Because when a husband and wife are one in body, they are prophesying unity to their household, releasing harmony into their children, and establishing spiritual authority in their territory. But when they're divided sexually, the disunity spreads into their parenting, their finances, their ministry, and their emotional health. And it's not just about libido, it's about lordship. It's about whether Christ rules your covenant or whether shame does, whether you follow the patterns of the culture or the design of the Creator. Because if you want a God-honoring marriage, you cannot ignore God's plan for intimacy, which was never meant to be robotic or infrequent, but healing, joyful, and deeply bonding. And yes, past trauma, abuse, or sin may make this topic feel heavy, but that is all the more reason to let God redeem it. Because the cross doesn't just cleanse your past, it sanctifies your present and empowers your future. And if you've been carrying shame into the bedroom, God can set you free. If you've been avoiding touch because of fear or rejection, God can restore connection. But you have to be willing to bring this area into the light, to talk with your spouse, to listen without judgment, to pray together not just for spiritual gifts or financial provision, but for healing in intimacy. Because the truth is, Most couples who fall into affairs didn't get seduced overnight. They got starved over time, and the enemy fed the hunger with counterfeit affection, with fantasy, with secrecy, and what could have been satisfied in covenant was stolen through neglect. And that's the warning. Neglect is the seed of destruction, and passion doesn't die quickly. It dies slowly, through days of silence, weeks of misunderstanding, and months of avoidance, until two people forget how to reach for each other, how to forgive, how to laugh, how to touch without fear. And maybe that's where you are now. Maybe you're married but feel alone. Maybe sex has become a battlefield instead of a blessing, a topic of shame instead of a place of grace. But God is not done with you. And this part of your marriage is not too far gone. Because when Jesus restores, He restores all. Not just the spiritual, not just the public, but the private, the hidden, the tender places we don't show anyone. And if you dare to believe that, you will see your marriage come alive again. Not because everything is perfect, but because you finally stop pretending, stop avoiding, and start fighting for connection again. Because sacred sex is not about control or obligation. It's about pursuit, about delight, about two people choosing to give fully, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And when that happens, the atmosphere in your home shifts. Your prayers deepen, your joy multiplies, and your unity terrifies hell. Because there is nothing more powerful on earth than a married couple who love each other deeply, serve each other joyfully, and pursue each other wholly. And no matter how far things have drifted, it's not too late to begin again. To humble yourself, to communicate, to initiate, to lay hands on one another, and pray not just for your bodies, but for your hearts to be knit together again. Because the enemy fears what you could become if you healed in this area. He fears your laughter, your intimacy, your prayers whispered in the dark. He fears a marriage bed full of covenant and truth, because that kind of union brings revival to the home, strength to the church, and glory to God. And that's exactly what you were made for.